Welcome all, with apologies for starting slightly late. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance Committee. Today's meeting is open to the public and will be webcast, and the recording will also be available for people to view later through the Council's website. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record or rebroadcast this meeting. The agenda and reports for today's meeting are available on the Council's website and via the modern.gov app. And paper copies are also available at the front for those of you here in person, should you want them. Please can I request that everyone turns their mobiles off and any other equipment switch to silent mode so that we don't disturb the meeting. And I'm pleased to report there's no fire test planned for today. So if the alarm sounds, please follow instructions from the Town Hall staff to assemble in Tudor Square. My name is Councillor Elle, Dodd. I'm the Councillor for Castle and Chair of this committee. If colleagues could go around and introduce themselves in the room, and then I note that we've got at least one visitor online also, so we will come to you also. Councillor Lee.
Councillor Mary Lee from Darnell Ward.
Hello, my name's Dianne Hurst. I'm an elected member from Richmond Ward.
Fran Belbin, Councillor for Firth Park Ward.
Bannister, Councillor for Grace Park.
Paul Turpin, Green Councillor, Glebus Valley.
Mike Levery, member for West Ecclesfield.
Councillor Joe Otten, Durham Totley.
Sue Alston, Councillor for Fulwood and Deputy Chair for this committee.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Jason Deach, Democratic Services.
Laurie Brennan, Strategy and Comms.
Sarah Hyde, Democratic Services.
And then online.
Hi, Mike Jackson, Chief Operating Officer. I'm sorry I can't be with there in person, but I wanted to be available to the committee if needed, so joining you online.
I think we've got no apologies for absence for turnout today, and there's no items for which we would need to exclude the press or members of the public. Do any members want to declare any declarations of interest with reference to today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Are members willing to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting from the 17th of July? I realise it's been a little while, but hopefully we can cast our minds back. Yep, consider that approved. Great, thank you. And item 6, I'm not aware of any petitions, questions or statements that we've received from members of the public. So we'll move on to, we're going to take the work programme first, partly because since we met in July, there's been quite a volume of work that this committee's been making progress through, most of which isn't yet mature enough to have come back onto our agenda, but we wanted to be able to recap some of that and for kind of public transparency, just go through some of the items that we are nonetheless working on behind the scenes and that will come to a future committee meeting. So Jason, perhaps you could talk us through that. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. So just to summarise this paper, it sets out the work programme for the committee for the rest of the year. There's an appendix on with a bit more detail about what we've got coming up. But as the Chair said, there's a couple of things to point out, really. Firstly, in paragraph 2, there are references from Council. There's a reference on protecting our parts. So we just need to consider today to make a note of that, because it had 2 asks of Governance Committee within that referral. So you might want to look at that as part of consideration. And then really to update on the other pieces of work that the Governance Committee has been doing. So first of all, we've been working on a review of public questions and petitions scheme. So about a year ago, we launched a new scheme for participation of the Council, and we said we would review that, and the committee's been doing some work in workshops and working group to look at that work. We've had several meetings with the working group which have actually covered that and other areas of work as well. We've also conducted a survey of members of the public and council officers and committee chairs, so we'll be looking at that in greater detail in the working group meeting. Secondly, we've been doing a review of full council and how that works, predominantly around the purpose, the formats, public participation elements, member participation and processes within full council. So we've conducted a survey as regards full council as well, and again the working group will be look at the results of that survey, bringing those back and looking at options for potential change to full council and bringing those forward. And then the third piece of work is a review of committee delegations, and the working group's doing some work on that. We've had an initial run through of the various delegations, and we'll be looking in more detail at that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jason, really helpful, and there's further detail in the papers available. Does anyone have any questions or comments? I suggest we take the kind of wider work programme first, and then we can come to the specific reference from full council. So questions or comments on the wider work programme? I see Councillor Belbin and then Councillor Levery.
Sorry, it was really on the referrals from full council, but to be honest, it was around the work on the charities, the work on charitable governance that was already on the work programme, I think. But and it's good to see that on this that it says we can agree the scope and a draft conflict of interest policy to bring in January, but later on the work programme it has no date, and that was worrying me a little bit. There was still no date, so it would be good if we could firm that up and definitely bring that item in January, because as you say, we have had an initial discussion around it, but I'm quite keen to take that work to go forward.
Councillor Levery.
Thanks, Chair. We did agree some time ago that we were going to produce an executive summary for our meetings. Can we have a progress update on where we are with that and when we're likely to have it implemented, or at least a draft come to this committee so we can look at it? Thank you.
Sorry, can you just clarify for my benefit as well as anyone else's, an executive summary of?
Committee meetings within the council. So instead of all the papers that we get, there's a covering executive summary, probably a couple of pages, which means that members can read that and then dive into the relevant bits of the document if they want to get more information, so that they're not expected to troll through hundreds of pages of documents for every meeting, which I know councillors don't. Thank you.
Understood. I think that was one of the recommendations that came out of a prior piece of work we were doing that officers were making progress on. Got you. Jason.
Thanks. Thanks for the question. So on that piece of work, we've started testing the best way to do that. So maybe using AI or something similar to do a summary and actually making sure that that works. We have started to put quick links in. So if you'll see the beginning of policy committee reports in particular, we put quick links into various bits of the report as a sort of a step towards doing that. So where there's a summary at the start of every report, there should be quick links, particularly where it's a lengthy document that points straight to parts of the report. So that's one step. I think the further step that we need to do is what's the best way of writing those exec summaries. And so we've started to use test AI, see whether that's an option. It's hit and miss, I suppose, in the quality of what it gets back. So there probably is a better way of doing that. So we'd probably test that back with members to make sure it's what they wanted. It was part of the wider set of recommendations the committee were looking at, the really practical steps about improving the way the system works, and that was one aspect of that piece of work. So I'll bring you further updates on that and let you know how we're getting on with it. Thanks.
So can we put it in the programme so it's identified and we know when it's coming? Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps it's worth, there were a number of recommendations that were included, of which that's one. I think that probably doesn't merit its own work programme item as it's quite a small topic area, but perhaps we can have an update on the kind of wider progress on that set of items that was all being considered together.
Just a comment on that, not according to the chairs of committees. I find it extremely challenging with
not that it's not important, but it is small in scope, and there are a number of other items that were also in that recommendation, so that would be helpful. Any other comments or questions on the Councillor Alston?
Okay, yeah, I think this is really more of a comment than a question, but there's a question in it. I was very pleased, well, we did have a very pleasing number of members of the public at the council meeting yesterday. Was it really only yesterday? And I just wondered, well, I hoped that that has meant we've got quite a good bit of public feedback on that we can take to our next working group. So that was really just to ask if that was successful. And also, obviously, we know as part of some of the remits work, we're looking at delegations, and I
Yes, sorry. Yes, that probably, yeah, we should have that in there as a work item agenda.
Jason, do you want to come in? My read is that in Appendix 1, reviewing our policy committee remits is one of the topics that's coming.
I think remits and delegations were separate things.
I think they've been separate and together and at different times. I just think it needs to be sort of clear that, because remits is wider than delegations, but delegations is an important thing that we are discussing, yes. Jason.
Thanks. Just on the survey for full council point, we have collected physical surveys, paper surveys from both the October and November council meetings, so we have had some back. We'll just look at the information in there and bring that back to the working group when we look at full council again. Thanks.
Great, and we also had a number of young people at yesterday's full council, which I know that Councillor Belbin and I met in advance of full council, and they were very enthusiastic and started sharing with us various aspects of their feedback as they observed full council happening. So hopefully we'll be able to work with comms colleagues and others to get a wider debrief from them about their experience of full council and what recommendations and advice they have for us about how we could be doing it better. Councillor Belbin.
Thanks. Yes, let's hope they were still as enthusiastic by the end of full council. I suppose is a real challenge there, but we will hear that feedback at a later point. It was just picking up really, I think, well, collectively some of the points here. I think there was quite a few recommendations that came out of that first part of the remits work, some of which were smaller for officers to take forward and some of which were perhaps bigger pieces of work, such as the delegations work. And I know we had a conversation beforehand as well around things like the engagement toolkit and how that potentially is part of the remits work as well. So I just wonder if perhaps outside of this meeting we do a little bit of work to break that down and work out what needs to go onto the work programme as separate items, because that perhaps do come within that remits work, but just makes it a little bit clearer. Exactly the bigger items that we're working on.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing nodding. Did any colleagues have any other comments on the protecting our parks reference that had come from full council? Otherwise, we're happy to go with the action proposed in that with regard to that item. And then otherwise, the recommendation from this paper is to consider the work programme and identify any further items for inclusion. We've flagged a few here, including to make sure that parks item is referenced in the January meeting agenda, and that we'll do some work outside of this conversation to consider any other updates that need to be added to the work programme and make sure that that's updated in advance of the January meeting as well. Colleagues, happy to approve on that basis? Great, thank you. In that case, we'll move to item 7, which is the reports of the community strategy and next steps. Sadly, the lead officer for this has been unable to make it for personal reasons, but we're joined by Laurie. So thank you very much for stepping in, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, pass on Tom's apologies for this afternoon. He really wanted to be here, but he's got a personal matter he needs to be involved in today. So I'm going to really briefly outline what's in the paper, and then obviously I'm sure members have got comments and questions for discussion in the session. Firstly, my first point on this is obviously this is a summary of and a reflection on the work that's taken place in the city on the community strategy over the last year. This was presented to Strategy and Resources Committee on the 15th of October, and it's probably the culmination of a really positive piece of work undertaken collaboratively with members in the council, including members in this room, but also our VCF partners, community organisations, and officers as well. With a really collaborative piece of work, and in lots of ways it's a good exemplar of how we can use the committee system, how we can use the way of collaboratively building strategy with communities and with partners, harnessing stakeholder and community insights into shaping something that actually gives us a really clear statement of intent for where we need to be over the next 10 years or so. As you know, from that piece of work, the working group that underpinned it actually spun out of a piece of work that started here, which was around public involvement, and obviously that element is a critical part of what we want to achieve in the community strategy, and we've heard that back from citizens and back from our VCF partners as well, and you'll see it embedded in what we're trying to do. The purpose of this paper is to really think about governance committees' future involvement in some of that, and as you'll reflect on the community strategy, which again I'm really keen to celebrate not only the work we put in but the contribution of partners into that and members, you'll see that the strategy, as well as having some clear recommendations for action about the things we need to do and change, also reflects a sort of the way of being we need to embody as an organisation as well, so really clear sets of behaviours about how we design and decide and take action with communities, how we listen and learn to what citizens are telling us and adapt to what our ways of working, how we tailor our resources and delivery to meet community needs, how we build partnerships based on trust with our partners but also citizens, and how we nurture those relationships and celebrate the strengths and assets in our communities as well. And this is written throughout the community strategy, and it's fundamental to thinking about how we change as an organisation. And this sits right in the front of our organisation's transformation around, which is Future Sheffield. Within that, some of the actions that spin out of it are multiple in lots of ways, including things like thinking about how we redevelop our relationship with community organisations. There's a piece of work to think about how we commission, how we engage community organisations. Thinking about how we enhance our approach to community engagement and reflect the principles and commitments we've made in the community strategy. So that is both in things like public meetings, as Councillor Alston mentioned in full council yesterday, but actually in absolutely every interaction we have with citizens, in every bit of the council, in everything we do. That's that's activity we need to do through things like staff learning and development, through enhancing our communities of practice, really growing and enhancing our expertise and assets within the organisation. But then also how we look at how we do joined up working and locality delivery of services, and how we invest in our community, so taking a collective view on community development with partners. There's also an element of that which is around community governance, and in the paper that we've brought to committee today, it sets out two areas, one around the community engagement aspect, and then the second part around neighbourhood governance as well, which clearly is an item that forms part of government's legislative programme as part of the devolution bill, but thinking about how community governance infrastructure is structured locally as well. The paper sets out and sort of probably prompts conversation here about governance committee's ongoing role in that, and how best to maximise your influence in some of those areas of work, particularly on how we focus on community engagement and what we can bring through this committee on where we can really focus on community engagement in the committee system, so that connecting to governance, the governance committee role, and then also neighbourhood governance, which is a little bit unclear at the moment because of the legislative programme, and that's not been ironed out fully, but obviously there's a commitment in there to making sure that governance committee are fundamentally part of that, whatever happens as we go forward with that. I'm going to stop there because I know that members want to comment on what's set out in the paper, but the recommendations suggest that to note and recognise and celebrate probably the community strategy and the work that's been done, which has been, if you haven't had a chance and you weren't part of the conversation at the S&R committee, I'd really recommend going back and looking at the contributions from not only our teams but also our community partners as part of that conversation. To then think about how the delivery of community strategies moved into connects with the Future Sheffield programme, because it's fundamentally a part of our future operating model as an organisation, and the Empowered Community programme as part of that. And then finally to think about future activity and think about the future role of this committee in that area of work. Chair, if that's all right, I'll stop there because I'm conscious that members want to come in and I didn't want to sort of hog the floor. Thanks.
Thanks, Laurie, and thanks to you and the team for the work on this. Who would like to come in with questions or comments? Councillor Alston.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. So, a few things. Of course, you recall I was at SNR when we agreed the community strategy paper, and absolutely welcome it. I offered at the time, I remember, some constructive challenge, I think, around some of the, a challenge relating to the difficulty of such a broad strategy that probably not just touches but leans heavily into almost all the work the council does, effectively, doesn't it? So there's always a kind of a scope risk with something like that, isn't there? So if we ask ourselves, I'm going to go on for a little while, and do apologise everyone, ask ourselves why the community strategy is coming to the governance committee is a fair question, and I think the answer is on page 18 of the agenda, where it explains how the remit of this committee relates to the work going on the governance committee, so the work of the community strategy. So if the reason it's coming here is because of this relationship between that strategy and our committee's remit, then I would hope a report back to us would then give us some confidence in that the work was being taken in a direction that this committee approves of, that we think that the overlapping areas are, which to my mind include things like the functions of ALAX and the nature of the public engagement in the democratic process, which are clearly within the remit of the governance committee to look at, that these are being taken forward in the way that we think the governance committee want to see them taken forward, and raise the question, why aren't we just talking about it here, I suppose is the obvious question, rather than saying let's somebody else look at all this and then bring it back to us. And I don't think this paper does that. And I think the reason it doesn't do that is because of this kind of slight scope problem. And that's where we are, and we could all say, well, this committee needs to assert itself a bit more strongly, and that's fine. But we then look at the recommendations, and I appreciate these are just notes, and this is a process that's ongoing, that says that the community strategy is to be delivered through the Future Sheffield Empowered Communities Programme. Now, I'm also a member of the Future Sheffield Members Reference Board, so again, it's something I'm aware of through there. And we had a briefing on this in January, earlier this year, following which I sent an email around to other members of the Future Sheffield Members Board and a few other members, so some members here will have seen it, apologies to the rest of you, when I challenged actually the concept of the idea of giving work on the more community-focused aspect of how the council engages with the public, and I don't mean, there's various aspects to that, and so obviously at one level you say, how does the person issuing a parking ticket or working in the park or something engage with a member of the public? And I'm not really looking at that. I appreciate that the strategy probably should, and the Future Sheffield probably should, but it's not a question for the governance committee how they do that, so I'm not going to touch on that. But the question of how corporately we engage with the public, how the committees, not just through statute, we have obviously statutory duties to consult and so on, but how expanded around that, how we go about that. I said this is not properly a function of a project, Future Sheffield, which is principally about transforming the structure of the council so that it more efficiently delivers public services and delivers them better, and is highly reliant on highly expensive management consultants who, you ask them a question, they'll give you an answer, and they'll charge you £1 million, and they'll give you an answer, and you hope if it's how to reform a £1 billion organisation, that the answer will be worth more than £1 million. But if you ask them the wrong question, they'll give you an answer and charge you £1 million, but it will be it's a question that you should have known the answer to yourself already, and it's about something that they're not experts in, such as how you know, elected members should be dealing with the members of the public and how the committee should be dealing with members of the public. They'll give you an answer and you've wasted your money. So therefore, I think I'm highly concerned that the way this has gone is that because our role in terms of the LACs, in terms of the member engagement by the committees, public engagement by the committees, has been wrapped up into community engagement, that's been wrapped up into the community strategy, and that's been put into this Future Sheffield community empowerment strand, just because the word community appears in all of these things, I think, that we've lost we've given up our role here, and we've asked some management consultants at a huge expense to apply themselves to a question that they're not experts in. I mean, this part of what prompted me in January to write the email is I thought what they said about community engagement was very basic, really, frankly, because their job is knowing how to deploy human resources, isn't it? So I think we've gone wrong here, and I think there's a danger that we're going to spend a lot of money with management consultants and sit around for years waiting for them to report and not do our job, and we should make sure we're not going to do that, and make sure that we look at the questions that are within our remit ourselves sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hutton. That was very helpful to understand your perspective. Was there a question?
No.
Okay. Any other colleagues waiting to come in? Did you want to respond to an absence of question nonetheless, Laurie?
Chair, shall we let other members contribute, and maybe I can come back? But really appreciate Councillor Hutton's comments, and definitely do that.
Councillor Alston.
Yeah, thank you. I shall try and keep this fairly succinct, but I think my concerns really arise from the fact that we seem to have lost sight of where we started and what this committee was actually set out to do at the beginning, which, as Councillor Hutton's explained, seems to have just got subsumed into much more high-level discussions and decision-making. And as far as I can see it, our part of community engagement was around how we involve and include the public and community organisations in the decision-making that councillors make on their behalf. And I am very concerned by the implications, as I've read it in this paper, that would then be just taken on by Future Sheffield project. Now, that may not have been the intent of it, but that is how it reads. And I really think that I couldn't be happy with this paper as it's written at the moment. The same applies to, in a slightly different way, with the work on local area committees, in that the work we were setting out to do was quite different to what has now come back, and, you know, accepting that there are things going on at a national level that may implicate that. So I just think that we need to divide out clearly the work that this committee can and should be doing, and basically I'm not happy to keep with the recommendations that are in there because I don't think they're clear, and I think that the inference, as I read it, that basically Future Sheffield will take responsibility for everything and might let us know, as it says here, give us the opportunity for input when appropriate. So I'm not sure whose decision it would be when it was appropriate. I'm not sure exactly where Future Sheffield's various committees fit within the governance structure of the council, and therefore that makes me even more uncomfortable to just have work passed that way when really it was this governance committee's initial responsibility.
Thank you. Councillor Belbin.
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose I want to respond to some of that, and partly it's going back over the history of how we've got to where we are. I think we started, stopped when I was chair of this committee when we brought the Involve report to this committee and looked at how we would take that further, and that report was very focused on consultation, engagement with communities and how we could do that better. Over the course of pursuing that work, we engaged with communities and, you know, you'll remember, Joe, you were at one of those sessions, and I think communities came back to us and said, you've got the wrong starting point. By starting with consultation and engagement, you need to think more widely. And I'm actually quite proud of the work that we did by actually engaging with and listening to communities. And I think we set off down the track then of developing the community strategy that approached the work really quite differently. Instead of us sitting around in a committee meeting, you know, telling communities what is good for them, I think we've started off a really positive conversation that has led to the community strategy. Now, that is very high level at the moment, and there's clearly a lot more work to be done. I think the empowered communities piece of work sits within Future Sheffield in the sense that it's a cross-council whole piece of work. It's very much about changing the culture of how we work, about changing the way that we work with communities, and how officers and how council teams and services work with communities. I think that properly sits with Future Sheffield. But there is, around that, there is a piece of work around how we as committees engage with communities that I think, you know, you're probably right. We possibly don't need to make the decisions based on the recommendations in the paper here today. But I think, you know, we obviously need to have that ongoing conversation, carrying on that approach of working with the community, with people in communities, that I think has been quite successful up to now. And it was a real pleasure actually seeing the community strategy and the way it was delivered by people from different community organisations. It actually felt like we were working very much in partnership, which I feel is the appropriate way forward. And I think that's actually done some good things just in terms of how we work as committees as well. If we're already thinking a little bit that committee rooms are not, these committee meetings are not just for councillors sat around having conversations with officers, but genuinely having conversations with people in the outside world. I feel like that's a positive thing. I think there's probably, again, it probably comes back to the work programme, where we do think a little bit more about how we continue the work that is very specific to governance, which might be around how we do that engagement with committees and how committees go out and seek input from relevant communities for their work, and be happy to, you know, take the paper back and look at that in a bit more detail. But I do think we should be quite proud, really, and positive about where the work has ended up in terms of getting to the community strategy, and not worrying that too much that we've gone off-piste, if you like, because I think that's what we were being told by people out in Sheffield, and I don't think it's a bad thing to have listened to them. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to take Councillor Levery, and then I see Mike online wants to come in.
Thanks, Chair. I think we're getting into difficult areas in respect of our committee system, our constitution, how we're structured, the way we operate, and what we've found ourselves within Future Sheffield is an organisation that's set up initially to deal with system processes and issues. It's now developed into a completely different body, doing something completely different, which is about the development of the future of this council, how it's going to structure itself, how it's going to operate. So it's moved on a long way from where it started. Now, the question is, how does that fit within our governance structure in this council? Who is the Future Sheffield members group accountable to? Is it to this committee? Is it to SNR? And where does it fit in the process? Because we have a process whereby we have policy committees, we have governance committee, and we have subcommittees. And in the Constitution, every year, we allocate what subcommittees will be required, which are committees that are expected to work on a long-term basis. Now, I believe that Future Sheffield is a subcommittee of one of the policy committees or governance. And I seem to remember even before we started down this process, I can remember we had local and members group which didn't fit in with the Constitution, and we agreed to go with it and left it, it's still there. It isn't constitutionally recognised. It is a members group. And so are we going to have to look at our Constitution and say, well, do we need to change it to take account of these sorts of developments taking place? Or can we fit them in to our current Constitution so that it's clear and understanding about how it operates? Thank you.
Thank you. Several colleagues have raised questions which I think officers would be well placed to respond to. So I'm going to take Mike, who's online, and then David has also indicated to come in, and then I'll come back round for members' comments again afterwards. Mike.
Thanks, Chair. I did want to hopefully reassure members and clarify what was intended around the role of Future Sheffield, although I think Councillor Belbin has pretty much covered what I was going to say. I think a number of members have made the point that Future Sheffield will and actually does need to touch, most things that the council does. So, for instance, when services are being redesigned under Future Sheffield, we need to make sure that the people involved are thinking about how that service will better engage with communities going forward. That's one example. We know we need to better support our managers to lead in an environment where working with communities and other partners is a natural thing that is done intuitively as part of thinking about delivering better services going forward. To do that comprehensively across a big, complex organisation like Sheffield City Council, it takes quite a lot of effort and commitment. So the point about putting the objectives of the community strategy into Future Sheffield and making sure that we do that well across the whole of the organisation. It's certainly not about usurping, the role of members in engagement with communities, or indeed taking the lead on community engagement for the council. Is making sure that the whole of the council understands what you want us to do in terms of how to engage with communities, and that we do that well and systematically across the whole organisation. So I hope that's helpful in building on some of the points Councillor Belbin made. In terms of the governance of Future Sheffield, those of you who are in the working group earlier will know that I think, Councillor Belbin acknowledged the fact that we need to think again about quite how that sits within the wider council's governance. So I hope that helps clarify what the intention was around Future Sheffield.
Thank you. Really helpful. David.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, just add on to what Councillor Belbin and Mike have said, in that, the governance of this sits with Strategy and Resources for Future Sheffield. It oversees the programme and had a report on it in February and approved, as recently as July, and approved the way forward. I'd also want to say that Future Sheffield isn't just about processes and procedures. It's always been about the culture of the organisation as well. And particularly within that officer corps. And that was, Strategy and Resources signed off the final recommendations from the Street Tree Inquiry report being picked up through the Future Sheffield programme. So that's long been recognised by Strategy and Resources of one of the elements that's within it. So it is Strategy and Resources that has the ultimate responsibility for this. We do occasionally have member groups that are there for engagement purposes that are outside of the formal structure, but that doesn't take away from the formal structure and the responsibilities that the policy committees have, including Strategy and Resources.
Thank you both. That seems to address some of the points that have been raised by colleagues. Did members want to come?
I just want to say, there was one point that Councillor Alston raised about who decides whether it's appropriate what this committee deals with. If it's within its remit, it's this committee, so rather than anybody else.
Thank you. Colleagues, I see Councillor Hurst wanted to come in, if others can indicate, otherwise we'll bring this to a conclusion shortly.
Thank you, yes. Mike has said quite a lot of what I wanted to say. That Future Sheffield is largely an organisation that deals with, or a structure, or a working group, or a something programme that deals with procedures and organisation and it's about money saving and the operation of the council delivering services and how that looks and what it costs going forwards. But I think that what we've been asking is how the report that we're just taking now about how we engage with communities, how that is linked to the work that we did following It's Our City when we sat down with consultants and we looked at, following the referendum, how we would move to a committee system and how that would look and how it would feel and how it would operate. And I know that quite a lot of the officers and members in this room weren't here at that time. But I think that the governance committee has its roots in that, because what we were talking about all that time was we have to look at the governance and the governance within the framework and the governance with the mandate that we've been given for the people of Sheffield. And we seem to have lost that disconnect. There seems to be a disconnect now. And I think we need to rather than saying, no, let's go with this and let future Sheffield go ahead and do what it's doing. We're the members that sat down, or some of us were on this committee then and sat down and had all the hours with the consultant and did the design and put it out there for test and agreed to continue working until that it had been reviewed. Now we need to see how that links with how the organisation is evolving and the governance and the structure and the framework of how the council works, because the members of the board of governors, aren't we? We are with the board. We decide what happens going forward and to see whether that reflects with the work that we originally did and the spirit of that, rather than signing it off and surrendering it to a very narrow, focused, specific programme, I think.
Thanks. I don't see any other hands from among members. So Laurie, did you want to come back in at all?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just huge thank you for all the comments. I think there's been some really valuable and useful insights there, and obviously thank you to Mike Jackson as well for providing some insight on the sort of the overarching work of Future Sheffield here. I think probably what I'm hearing is there's probably a good opportunity to think about whether we bring this back. I think taking on board everything members have heard, there's nothing, the recommendations aren't to agree anything here anyway, they're largely to note. So I think what's been massively helpful is most members have contributed to the conversation, and I think we've got a really good insight about how we could better bring precision to what's been presented here. I think if it's okay, Chair, I think what we'll do is I've been making copious notes through that. If I can take this back and maybe bring it back to the next meeting with a wider conversation, I'm happy to suggest that. I'm keen to suggest that's a good thing to do, but obviously take your steer on that.
Thank you. That mirrors very closely what I think I've heard also. It sounds like within the full scope of the transformation required to deliver the now agreed community strategy, there's many aspects that rightly sit within the Future Sheffield transformation programme. They relate to the future council that we want to be to deliver on these ambitions and require that kind of wholesale approach. But there are some aspects that very clearly sit within the remit of this committee and which we want to be clearer how we will take them forward. And as we've heard, there are member and officer governance conversations happening about other aspects of the work that we will want to take account of in planning how we take this work forward too. So it sounds sensible for us to kind of take this paper back. I'm seeing nodding from across the room. And we'll come back to this following kind of conversations as we spoke about a bit earlier on our work programme, our meeting in January. I did just want to take the opportunity, kind of stepping back from the next steps, if you like, just to reflect that from a governance committee perspective, the development of the community strategy itself was quite an innovative approach across 3 different groups of constituencies involving councillors, officers and members of the VCS FE. And I was part of some of those groups in part because of my role as chair of this committee, and so I wanted to take the opportunity to place on record my thanks not only to the team who were involved and to fellow councillors who were involved, but also to the VCS FE representatives who were involved for their contribution and for their kind of flexibility to experiment and particularly to work at pace. The community strategy was delivered, I think, in kind of record time for something that, as colleagues have commented, is quite wide-ranging. And I think there's a lot to learn from that approach that would inform our wider approach to community engagement, both at an officer level and, as we've been discussing, at a member level. And I know that the team are doing some work to bring out that learning, so hopefully we'll be able to also reflect on that at a later point. Thank you. With that, I think that brings us to the end of our formal meeting for today. Our next meeting will be held on the 15th of January in the new year. But no doubt we will see colleagues many times between now and then. Thank you very much.